especially caused by someone's death. And then I did a bit more research, and of course, it is not always only death that the grief comes from. It's basically, as you know, it's due to a loss, and it could be a loss of, like right now, as we know in the news, we are hearing about the Australian bushfires, which are completely out of control, where people are losing homes. So I know it's not the same as losing a relative or a fellow human being, but it's still a shocking loss, the way in that way the homes are being lost. And of course, other things can include when we have, let's say, accidents and sudden loss of life in the accidents or injuries. So, severe illnesses that we could get from these accidents. So, for example, recently in Iran, when the Ukrainian plane was shot down, even though it was by mistake, a lot of lives, over 160, 170 lives were lost in that flight. And a lot of people will be grieving over that. Obviously very unexpected. And then also, of course, the most common one, like I've mentioned now, that people grieve over the departed ones. Whether it's sudden or even expected, there's still the grieving still happens, and it's like it's just a big loss for people. So I thought it's good that we talk about these things, and of course the idea is to examine these matters in a spiritual way, and let me say that again. The idea is to examine them from the spiritual point of view, and also to understand from the earthly point of view as well how things happen, what these things are. So, Gregory, if I can start with you, our first question. Why is the grief so painful, when we lose someone? Why is that such a painful thing that, of course, I must add that people grieve in different ways. Everybody's an individual, and the way grief comes to different people, it's it will be different for each person. But let's say in general, we find that people, when you lose a loved one, even as I say, it could be old age, people still...
to answer why people grieve.
Yes, so basically, why is that loss so painful? I would like to ask that to Gregory.
Yeah.
You said you were asking why the loss is so painful.
Yes.
Like you mentioned, it is a loss. Most of these things are permanent loss. And that is what makes it very deep, because it transcends the intellect and transcends the earthly most times. So what has now departed, or what has, in quotes, been lost, one may never regain. And so that is why in many responses to such, all right, it turns out that it shocks them. It gets very deep into their psyche. It touches the inner man, and which really feels the grief. But again, some of the challenges are that one has never made preparations to understand the basis of some of this grief and what lies behind it. So you find the scenario that someone is gone, and in quotes, is gone forever. And so such things only affect someone very deeply when he's considering looking at the scenario from one part, and that part is that of the earthly. Whereas should that person have a deeper view of what life is all about, maybe that grief will not be as painful.
Thank you for that. Definitely, that the one point you made about the loss is forever is you could say, very true. Um, so obviously, yes, you're not going to meet them again, or that experiencing that you've had together is not going to be repeated. So that opportunity is gone. So yes, I can fully understand that. And okay, so
Yeah,
I
before we go, yeah,
go on, Manna.
sorry.
You want to come in? Go on.
Yes, yeah. Before we go into, the reasons why people grieve or why you're looking at grief, critically. Why not look at, why the reason? I mean, the different forms of grief people experience.
Yes.
To give us a wider picture of, what people really grieve about.
Okay, so I did mention in the beginning that we do grieve obviously about lost loved ones, people
Yeah,
passing on. It can be you could call it natural death, old age, or it could be an illness. They die of an illness. It could be of an accident, like we said, the recent Ukrainian plane, shot down in Iran by accident, and
yeah,
or any accident, of course, can be.
yeah.
We can
Just,
imagine that. Also, the other type of losses I mentioned in Australian bushfire, there are people losing homes with that
yeah,
and also there's also the people who are fighting the bushfire, the firemen, they're also losing their life. They're actually fighting, and then obviously, unfortunately, sometimes you can't. You'll be caught. You're obviously trying to help and save lives, but sometimes you get caught out yourself. And of course, the other one I also thought about was war.
yeah,
That is a
yeah,
big, has a very heavy effect on people. Not only the people who are fighting, obviously, because they're in the army or whatever. Those people are directly affected, obviously, or their colleagues of the soldiers and so on. They would be affected quite seriously. And of course, the relatives of such people fighting in the wars, they're also affected through these losses. So okay, so maybe we should look
yeah. So,
first at the.
yeah,
Go on, Mena. You want to talk about a particular type of loss?
yeah. There are also some grieving situations where people actually feel that sense of loss of, money.
Money,
People grieve
yes,
over, yeah, especially those, not only gamblers, people who actually have lost an earning through maybe carelessness or through um, theft or burglary. Those
yes,
also, could be classified as a grief as well. People also could be grieving over, well, the absence of a friend or the loss of a friend.
yes,
Yeah, so people grieve over such situations as well.
of course,
Where some people also, take it to extreme, situations where they could just be paranoid and start grieving over the slightest, displacement of things in the home. So you could see that, these ones are actually, sometimes you might see it's just physical, you might ascribe just a physical cause to such grief, but sometimes it transcends, what is just natural. And you could say it's vengeance on the spiritual as well. People just, become paranoid, grieving over things that are sometimes immaterial. Well,
yes,
maybe they don't have a particular material, say, tool or something like that. They could start, throwing up tantrums and all that. So,
Well, grieving is normally a sadness, so
yeah,
tantrum, I will say, is not quite grieving, but yes, I accept that there's a variety of such scenarios where grieving takes place. So, okay, so let's try to focus on one aspect first, and then work our way through the different sort of types of, you could say, grieving there is. Okay, I think
I
we
don't
should.
think, yeah, no, I mean, grieving, yeah, I mean, the more particular common one is, grieving over the loss of, a loved one,
Exactly. I
perhaps,
think we should
or,
focus on that number one because that's the biggest thing. So yes. Okay. So I mean, let's
uh,
again talk about the things that are happening in the news at the moment. These are, like I told you, about the disaster of this airplane, in Iran being hit by Ukrainian plane being hit by a missile, and obviously that was completely unexpected. And so a lot of people are hit by that, and then obviously, yeah. So maybe we can start with that one first. Gregory, I mean, let's look at some of these scenarios where people grieve over, different things. So just this recent loss, as I mentioned about in the news, with this Ukrainian plane being shot down, and it affected not only the Iranian people who were traveling on it. There were Canadians, there was Ukrainians. There's, I think at least 5-6 different nationalities on it, that
yeah,
plane.
sure.
And so, and obviously all the relatives. There have been quite a few stories on that. And so my question on that would be, Gregory, that when something happens completely out of the blue like that, how can, I mean, the grief is, would you say that's a completely natural thing? And how can you deal with that sort of scenario? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, how does one deal with that sort of scenario? And but you also mentioned that it happened out of the blues. Yes, the manifestation of such was unexpected. When things are unexpected, it is said it came out of the blues. Whereas when things are expected, so you can see it coming. Whatever happens in life must have had a basis for such, and it is the basis, what lies behind it, that one should most of the time be looking at. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, how should one respond to such suddenness of an activity which many are unprepared for? The first case where these things happen, one should know that each person, each group of people have their volitions, which volitions have come into activity basically here on earth. Some of these volitions have been set in motion, not in an earthly way, but in a non-earthly way. By non-earthly, one is talking of ethereally, and also in an animistic realm, and also spiritually. These threads have been sown. These threads will definitely wander about in creation and will definitely return heavily laden. And what then happens when these threads return? It may be at a particular time where it is unexpected that these returns manifest physically in an earthly sense. So these returns, because they are not been expected as such, because man has now lost that innate ability for deep reflection, it becomes very sudden, because many are unprepared for it. It is that unpreparedness that causes the problem, because one is now struck by something he or she hasn't expected, whether it be missile attack or earthquakes or many other things. They are unexpected intellectually. But we want to observe and be very keen in its observation spiritually. Many a signal is sent, or one becomes very perceptive if one listens to one's intuition very carefully, in such a way that many a thing could also be avoided. But this turned out not to be the case. And these sudden occurrences now lead to sorrow and grief. In this particular case, the loss of life. Now, if you look at the other side, how should one respond to it? It is very easy or simple to say one should be very reticent in one's observation, albeit one should allow the intuition to come to gain precedence in one's activities in such a way that whatever the scenario, one is prepared to face it, be it life-changing. For the physical body which we use is only a tool. What really matters is what uses the physical body, and that which uses the physical body, the inner core, is the spirit, and its covering without the physical body is called the soul. So the more many a person prepares to grasp things in a more in a more non-earthly manner, the more prepared that person is to examine scenarios in a wholesome fashion. So it is good to observe the final earthly precipitation, but at the same time, it is very important for the human spirit, which human spirit has a covering which is referred to as the soul, to be on the alert for many a thing which will have brought it down, by being on the alert, by having good volition, by supporting many a good cause. That particular personality is able to buffer himself or herself, and what would have caused grief or sorrow may well turn out to be joy.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Really, what you've just said there is like, it turns everything, I was going to say upside down or inside out. It's like how we see things, let's say from, you use the word intellect, or from the, let's say, earthly viewpoint, and how it can be seen from the spiritual viewpoint can be completely different. So I don't know if you use the word blessing in there, but something that looks like disaster, let's say, on the earthly viewpoint, may even be a blessing from the spiritual viewpoint. and I think we should explore that more actually, because as you said, these things happen. The word you just shared there is things happening which are unexpected, and therefore we are unprepared for it. But if we are not, of course, you don't expect disaster, but if you, let's say, in quotes, prepared, and I think you mentioned using our intuition, to be awake and to be, to be aware of things that are happening, and then obviously you can even deal with the situation maybe differently when you're not prepared, obviously, then you're not expecting. So I think we should explore that. I mean, this topic is incredibly wide-ranging, and just this one question on this accident of the Ukrainian plane in Iran, which is a missile attack. It's like opening up so many things just by that, and I want to also cover other things with regard to the, let's say, other types of grief. So I'm a bit conscious of that, not to dwell too long on one particular aspect of grief, or one particular scenario of grief, let me say. So before
he goes further,
yes.
Gregory, I think you might be able, can you look at the fact that most of these griefs which people suffer, they're not necessarily unforeseen. Most of the natural disasters are now predictable, and people are warned far long in advance, to run for safety, but people still stay and suffer the consequence, and still they add to the calamity. So how would you see it as, not as events that are unforeseen? Most of these natural disasters.
Thanks for that, for including that.
Yeah.
What you just mentioned is important. These are grief, or this is grief, which has been precipitated by human stubbornness, by human unwillingness to understand what happens in life. There has all this, the typical scenario which is very prevalent nowadays is that of the climate change. Here it's been mentioned again and again and again, and nothing as such is done about it. Of course, the sea levels are rising gradually, and many have discussed about it, but due to human stubbornness, they refuse to acknowledge. In that case, the sorrow and the grief is self-inflicted. The only advice one may give to such is to wake up in good time, to understand or to realize what is likely to return to those who have refused to be on the alert. For it's as if they themselves have placed a bandage which blindfolds them. That is one typical scenario. The other scenario is, which brings us to this type of discussion, is that which has been identified, which basically is the original fall of man, which is that of the overdevelopment of the intellect. That scenario in which man relies only on the intellect to the exclusion of the activity of the spirit. That particular scenario is so dangerous. And now, with the advent of the work which we examine on a daily basis, that had been brought to the fore, showing us the danger, which danger had been inherited, which danger persists because the human being relies solely on the intellect rather than understanding how to use the intellect to ensure it works in harmony with the spirit. Such grief, which may arise from such on the long run, leads to eternal damnation, which damnation is the effacement of the human personality from the book of life. That grief is the greatest that can befall the human spirit, which human spirit has set out from its home as an unconscious spirit gem in order to experience and mature. That call has always been out. Hence, the advent of many a called one and many special ones that have always been calling out to man. The grief which will accrue from not taking heed or listening to these calls is the most damnable which can befall the human spirit. The griefs which we had enumerated and mentioned are only temporary grief, but the one which is hereby mentioned is a permanent grief.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Gregory. I don't know if it's right to put it as a permanent grief, or would you say that it's a grief that would eventually end in, you did mention it, that, it would eventually end in the person being effaced from the book of life. I mean, it actually, the human spirit loses personality. We again loses its personality and goes back to a spirit gem, isn't it? So
thank you for the addition.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks for that, Mena, as well. Dear listeners, you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And if you're interested in getting a copy of the Grail message or want some more information, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll spell that, www.grail, G-R-A-I-L, message, MESSAGE.com. And the topic for discussion tonight is grief. And if you are interested in to contribute with any questions or comments, the number to contact us, our UK number is 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. Again, you can call, text or use WhatsApp. Gregory,
you did.
Yeah, go on, Mena.
Gregory, thanks. I think could you look at the loss of material loss, material or financial loss, grieving over material or financial loss. What is the consequence about grieving over such a loss, Gregory?
Well, with material loss, the answer is very clear using the word material. It is temporal. It is not permanent. And many, although grieve over material loss, the key here is how does one respond to such losses? Sometimes such losses in quotes, are helpful to the human spirit. For if you consider the case of someone who loses so much money, whilst that person had been a drunkard, but now having lost so much money, is unable to buy the alcohol he lost so much. On a temporary basis, the person who lost that fund will feel sad. But on the long run, it was good he lost that funds because he was going to use it for self-destruction. So holding on to the loss of material things sometimes may not be to the benefit of the person who has lost it. If, however, he or she is able to reflect in his or her intuitions, then before long, they will come to a better conclusion as to why they themselves had to lose that particular material thing. So the loss of a material thing, one may not say it is bad, but if one is able to have an overview, a complete view from on high, then one is able to draw a better conclusion and learn the necessary lesson. Like we mentioned earlier, the key to this is being on the alert. If one is always on the alert and always weighing things, then the tendency is that one may not strive in such a way as to have an accumulation or over-accumulation of material things, which sort of diverts his attention to that which is most important. For these material things, most of the time, if not well controlled, now diverts man's attention from that which is important. And that which is important is that which is of benefit to the human spirit, which enables it to mature and set out on the path to lead it back home as a self-conscious human spirit.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Are there any implications for, being personally attached to material ends? I mean, if I'm so bent on the loss of any material, my house or a car, or perhaps a child, what is the implication of that? Does it have any spiritual implication?
Well, it all depends on what value one has placed on these, in quotes, what has been lost. If one had placed a very high value on some of these things, then the hurt, the grief, the sorrow will be very deep. If one has not placed such a high value on what has been lost, actually the grief will be minimal, if at all. So it depends on how much value one has placed on what has been lost, whether it's been a material thing or maybe the loss of a personality. No one will go about feeling sad when you have lost 1 penny. But many will be very sad if they have lost 1,000,000. And
Yes.
people will be saddest if they've lost a personal friend. So it depends on the griever, the person who is aggrieved, the value he or she has placed on that which has been lost.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Does it have any implication in terms of, my after my journey after life? Does it impact my life in the beyond?
Of course, the more a person attaches himself or herself to a particular thing, the more and that thing is lost, the more that person feels the loss. And if it's that of a temporary or an earthly thing, it therefore means if he attaches too much importance to such, after one's departure from the earth, and because of the threads he or she has spun around that particular loss, if that loss is a material thing, then the tendency is very high that he or she will be attached to it. And being attached to it, it means he or she won't be able to rise to the lighter conditions or to the fairer conditions in the beyond. On the other hand, if, say, one like the disciples of Christ at that time, who were so attached to their Lord, and when in a sudden he was subjected to such a brutal murder, and because of their inner spiritual attachment, they always reflected about his words. They therefore bound themselves to his teachings and to him. And as a result of their inner striving to follow, to live his word the way he has taught it, to experience the way they have learned from him, such threads are spun which bind these disciples to their master. In all naturalness, they will be drawn up in accordance with the purity of their love for their master.
Yeah. There are also grieving persons who actually commit suicide, maybe through the loss of fame. What is your advice for? What's the implication and your advice for such persons who go along that line, tread those paths?
Well, shouldn't everyone ask what fame is? And whether that fame is of benefit. For many who have now to commit suicide, to deprive themselves the opportunity for self-reflection, which is what fame is. For when a person in quotes is famous, that's the many people in the world start converging on such person. So where is the time now for self-reflection? And now, if within the scheme of things, such in quotes fame is suddenly taken away, so that they will reflect about themselves, will reflect about their weaknesses and their strong points. And because that has been taken away, they now commit suicide. Then you must ask them, what causes such things? Basically, it is vanity. Vanity, wanting to place themselves on a pedestal where they do not really belong. Such things that many call fame are only temporary acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that a personality has been able to do something which sometimes is of benefit to others. Or in other cases, you find that such activities which, when accomplished, are strictly of very little benefit to others. So these things which is referred to as fame or these opportunities are very temporary. And that which is temporary does not last long. That which lasts long is that which is permanent or near permanent. To build up oneself for that which is permanent requires inner activity of the human spirit, striving after good volition, not waiting for others to praise it, not wanting to be famous and be distracted, but striving with all one's strength.
Yeah, thank you for that description. Can I ask you to look at discuss these online bullying? Because that is where people lose fame as well. People are bullied online, and some take it to extreme and no longer find any, how I call it now, any need to live, and in the process also go down the line of suicide. So can you look at it, both for the victim, look at it, what's the spiritual implication for the victim and also for the perpetrator, because, both sides are could be wrong, but how does it balance out in terms of spiritual assessments or
You yourself mentioned, you said it's online.
yeah.
If you go to a place and you find there's bullying there and there's noise, what do? Do you remain in the same place? Won't you move to some other places? And that is one question. And why has it got to be a particular person who's being bullied online? Many a time, people want to have, in quotes, fun. And they visit scenarios where what they call fun could be realized. And of course, these scenarios, these areas, are fields, are populated by people who do not have a good volition. So What are the expectations? Many leave themselves open to such dark currents. Bullying cannot be any other thing other than a dark current. Therefore, one has to be on the alert. On the alert for these dark currents and strive to avoid them if one can, else move away. But if many refuse to move and they keep searching these, in quotes, dark neighborhoods, then it is they who sought such, and they have to bear the consequences. So this bullying, in quotes, which is the bullying is in quotes, which is mentioned in the is mentioned online, is only a product of many seeking fun amongst those whom they don't even know. They do not know what activates people they have met up there. And once these other people realize the weaknesses, they capitalize on it. So many who intend to go out there should be on the alert.
Yeah. So I was looking at it. So they just be on the alert. What are the perpetrators? What is the? Are they free to do what they are doing? Spiritually?
Those who have sown will have to reap. There are many here on earth who have sprung, whose volition is very dark. And that says it all. For your volition must be dark when you go out to bully people, knowing fully well if you were bullied, you wouldn't like it. So if you now go out to bully people who have not wronged you, then you should know where you belong. The spiritual consequences are dire. But for those of good volition, they must be on the alert and not allow dirt to be thrown at them. They must develop a very strong volition in pursuing their paths, not only online, but in other things, in all of their endeavors. What makes it terrible is, in the case of online, you do not know whom the person who is bullying you is. Whereas in everyday life, you can see whom the person is and know how to take action. So, if one is on the alert, the possibility is there that you know how to avoid them, or you now find a way of passing such information of the person who bullies to those who know how to handle it. But don't forget, many of these people who are bullied expose themselves, expose their weaknesses to those who are wolves in sheep's clothing. And once those people who bully, once they realize your weaknesses, they capitalize on it.
Oh. Thank you. Let's come back to this grief we're talking about initially. So, if I ask the question, is it good to grieve? Or are there any positive benefits in grieving?
Well, most of the time, grief is only a sudden reaction. It's a reaction. It's not that the reaction that you have lost something, and then you start feeling bad. That means you go into a state
Okay.
of high expectation to the lowest expectation. It is that change that causes the grief. Of course, depending on how you as a person responds to these sort of challenges, that's what defines you. Is it good to grieve?
Yes.
For one who has a deeper understanding, such question as yours must be weighed from a spiritual standpoint of view to find if the scenario, which has now been called a grief, could have been avoided. So it all depends on the inner maturity. The more immature a person is, the more grief you will have from that particular person.
Yes, I'm looking at it.
That is one possible scenario. The other area is the scenario where you know man has the free will. It's an intrinsic property of the human spirit. And because of this, one can see how this free will is misused. In that case, many who are at a higher level have a sense of sorrow and grief, but there's nothing they can do. That is natural, because they themselves can see how the immense gifts and powers which has been granted to man is being misused.
Yeah, you initially explained this grief, as the experience of a psychic shock. Is there nothing one can benefit from psychic shocks? Could it just be, could it be just the blame on the individual grieving? Is there not something that could benefit as a human spirit? Since you have already mentioned that it's also an intrinsic quality of the human spirit to grieve. Also, well, yeah, I've lost.
The only way a benefit can accrue from such is when one has a higher view and learns the necessary lesson. If I'm walking on the streets, or if I'm at home and I left a hot surface and I put my hand on the hot surface, of course it burns me. I'm shocked. That shock may be temporary or could be very deep. Or for some who have electric shock. And if they learn the necessary lesson, and they then are always on the alert, always weighing and examining, then with a good volition, because of the grief which they have had, they then spin threads, which threads will act as a buffer, as a protection against such things in future. Then they have learned the necessary lessons. Then they have gained from the grief that had arisen. So what they gain is what they now use subsequently. If, however, they haven't learned the necessary lesson, then that grief has not been of any benefit.
Okay. How do I then? I mean, just can you explain, deeper how people can actually learn from griefs? Because there are so many natural occurrences. Some natural disasters that do approach man. Some necessarily, yeah. Could you explain? There could be a way you could I could benefit from grieving. No doubt. If I lost someone, what are the laws actually telling me? If I lost my house, what are the laws telling me? If I have to go without food for days, how significant is that? What do I have to? What if I don't have to grieve? What do I do?
Well, it's not that one doesn't have to grieve or one has to grieve. As long as man has a good and strong volition, that good and strong volition built up in patience and perseverance, the possibility then arises that many a person is then led gradually from one scenario to another with carefulness. That happens in such a way that what should have brought sorrow now brings joy. And grief, most of the time, is the absence of joy. So, in spinning one's threads, it is done in such a way that it impacts or arises from the inner man, filled with good volition. And it has been said to keep the heart of your thoughts pure. By so doing, you will bring joy or you bring peace and happiness. With peace and happiness, with joy and happiness, there is no grief.
Okay. Before Sat comes in, can I quickly ask? Jesus Christ, personality, he did grieve a lot. Towards the end of his death, man saw that, well, his grief was too much. What he had to bear, even the carrying of the cross and all that. They refer that to since he didn't commit any crime, he must have been bearing the sins of humanity. So was the fault his, or where does the grief which Christ suffered lie?
The grief you mentioned, which arose in Christ, was only the grief for mankind, knowing fully well the potential and the gifts that many had been endowed with, and how they have not made use of these possibilities that have been granted. And without making use of these possibilities, the tendency is that the time granted to the human spirit to gain self-consciousness, the time will expire, and many are likely to return as unconscious spirit gems. That is what caused the grief. He himself had come to show man the way. Had man followed his teachings the way he intended, of course, that would have brought joy to him. But seeing that they were following the wrong path and they sealed his friendship and advice with enmity by nailing him to the cross, that filled him with grief. For he came in full of expectation to be able to do the bits which was necessary to allow man to gain clarity about the processes in life that will allow him to mature as quickly as possible. And that was why he gave from deep within himself the Lord's Prayer, which Lord's Prayer contains all that the human spirit needs for it to attain to that necessary maturity. So he came and gave. But at the same time, we found that humanity did not understand him as such, and instead nailed him to the cross, and in the long run turned around and say he died for them. The question which every person must ask themselves was at the cross when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Then you must ask yourself, do you forgive that which is good? No one forgives that which is good. Only that which is evil or bad or brings sorrow or brings grief. Only that can you beseech, and with the right understanding be forgiven you. So there was no way and there is no justification to say that he himself has come to die for humanity. There is no reason for such things. For strictly speaking, the laws remain the same. Whatever a personality has sown, if mankind have violated the rules of creation, then they must now reap the consequences. You should not expect to sow rice and then some other person to come and reap the rice, and then you are now forced to go without or to reap dust. Such unfairness, even within the affairs of men, is completely rejected. So he did not come to die for them. He came to show the path, and the path which leads to eternal life.
Oh, thank you for your explanations, Gregory. Where do you draw from? Can I quickly ask, where do you draw from? Where can readers themselves, where can they go to get more knowledge for themselves?
Well, these discussions have always taken place, and we all had mentioned that there is the work which forms the basis of many of our discussions, if not all of our discussions. This work, In the Light of Truth, the Grail Message by Abru Shane. The work can be found in the net for those of good volition who wish to find more in life than mere existence physically, who wish to understand why they themselves have incarnated this time here on earth. to understand the purpose of life. For those who are strong enough, they themselves can find clarity in this work. And as usual, it is not mentioned to entice you to it. Never ever take the discussions for granted. Don't even as such rely on the discussions. You yourself must examine rigorously and vigorously to find in this work, in the light of truth, what you yourself may be seeking. Only then will it grant you, through the heat thereby generated, this heat which warms you up and fills your soul. Only then do you come to greater clarity and movement in joyful activity.
Thank you, Gregory, for that. And dear listeners, just to remind you, you can get a copy of the Grail message, or if you want more information on the Grail message, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I spell that www.grail, Grail, message, message.com. And you're listening to Blessed Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion show from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the aim of the show, as we've just mentioned, is to introduce you to the Grail message in the light of truth by Abdrushin. And the topic we're discussing tonight is grief. And you can join in the discussion with any questions or comments. The number to contact us, our UK number is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. Now, Gregory, I want to go back to sort of bereavement when we're talking about grief, and people losing a loved one, which happens regularly, in life. So I wanted to ask you now, we've been talking about the impact of grief, or how grief affects the person who is grieving, but what about the person who is departed, who is left, passed on? Because one thing I haven't got into just yet, as you said, grieving is we know it's a sorrow, sadness at a loss, a permanent loss of somebody in this case, and we have looked at that. But what about the impact on the person who's departed, the person who has passed on? Because people, there's so many things we say. Let's say at the funeral, rest in peace, and we wish. We all have our memories of that departed person, and at this time, during the funeral and so on, people are crying or mourning and so on. So how does that impact the person who's departed?
Many expressions have arisen when, with the scenario of a departing one. Departing in the sense it has given up the use of the physical body, which is the instrument it used for experiencing whilst here on earth. But it, as a human soul, still exists and continues to exist. Because it continues to exist, it doesn't sit in one place, as many think, because many see the physical body laying prostrate, and they assume because it's in that posture, it is asleep. And for many who are asleep, they assume they are resting. And therefore the expression has risen, rest in peace. Strictly speaking, that expression is very wrong, and that expression is also very right. That expression is wrong in the sense when one views it from the physical, the intellectual side, looks at the view of the physical body resting. But from a spiritual standpoint, it is very wrong to assume that that departing one is also resting. However, the expression rest in peace only makes sense when the word peace is considered. Peace is not the lack of activities, but the presence of joyful, upbuilding activities. That is peace. And for someone to dwell in such a scenario filled with peaceful upbuilding, then the expression is right. To dwell in joyful upbuilding activities. Therefore, that expression has a dual meaning. From the spiritual and also from the earthly. Although the earthly part of it turns out to be a view which is wrong. The challenge which the departing one has is, while still very close by, is able to perceive of the thoughts, although somehow dimly, and can see the dimness of the thoughts of those who are still here on earth. How dim these thoughts and how gloomy they are. And in order to tell them that, look, I'm still here, it strives to hold them and console them, whilst at the same time it has not got use of the physical body. In striving to do that, it sort of initiates a sort of binding. And this sort of binding is only possible when he's able to use his physical body to explain to people, yet this physical body remains prostrate. Therefore, it becomes like a quandary. What should I do? It now becomes afraid. It's now filled with grief, seeing you, yourself, seeing the dim and desolate thoughts of others, and trying to come very close to them. It copies and becomes worried. So it is not a good scenario. The bits which one has mentioned, better clarity can be found in the walk in the light of truth. There you will find that which you yourself need. For what one has touched upon is only a very tiny tip. But in the walk in the light of truth, the grail message, all that the human spirit needs is revealed.
Thank you again, Gregory, for your answer there.
Yeah.
The,
Can I
go on,
quickly
Manna.
say something? Yeah, Gregory, you are trying to give, I don't know if we're trying to be equivocal in saying that the expression rest in peace could, be looked upon as, good in the spiritual sense. But you said to dwell in peace is not synonymous as, resting in peace, because there is activity everywhere, as you did mention. And in response to the law of movement, living in or resting or when we dwelling in joyful activity or in peace will not be in a state of rest. I stand to be corrected. I don't know if you would like to, clarify that point you were making.
One will briefly restate
Yeah.
the expression itself, rest in peace.
Yeah.
The emphasis was on the word peace.
Okay.
Peace is not the absence of joyful activity. Peace is a result of vigorous, upbuilding, harmonious activity. So for one to be involved in peace, to rest in peace, only means for one to be attracted to a scenario, an area where vigorous activities take place and one partakes of such activities which are harmonious and upbuilding. Then therein lies the correct expression, rests in peace. However, the view which many hold in that desolate neighborhood because the one has just departed only comes because they are judging from the earthly and they see the physical body gone prostrate. And because they are used to a scenario where one is asleep and therefore not engaged using the physical body as such in vigorous activity, they consider that scenario as being as rest. And then in peace, in the case where no one is distracting or calling them into activity, that scenario is what one referred to as utterly wrong, for they are judging only looking at the physical body, whereas the inner man is not of the physical body, but only made use of it as a tool and has now departed. That inner man is drawn to the regions which, in accordance with the laws of creation, it has matured. Such regions could be the regions of darkness and damnation, or the regions of joy and peaceful coexistence. For those who are drawn to the dark regions, there is no peace in the dark regions, but continuous torment and warfare. continuous disturbance. Whereas for those who are drawn to the higher realms, there exists vigorous, rigorous activities filled with blessing of upbuilding and harmoniousness. That is what that expression may then imply.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Going back to grieving to the person who has lost somebody, the griever, some people really get into a long-term, I don't want to use the word depression, but this long-term grieving and this loneliness sort of taking over, and because of their memories, they can't let go of the memories of that loved one that they had, when they were together. So what I want to look at now is what I see these things is like a vicious circle. If you have a certain way of thinking or seeing life in a particular way, then you just get dragged deeper and deeper into that way, and it doesn't seem even, let's say, gentle words from your friend or someone doesn't seem to be able to lift you out.
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay, yeah. Yes, what I'm saying is that...
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, maybe he wants you to.
Can you hear me,
Maybe,
Gregory?
yeah.
Can you hear me?
But you were quiet for some time.
Oh, okay. I was talking actually, but I don't know what happened there. I was actually talking. So let me just repeat that. So basically, I want to talk about the griever who has lost somebody, a loved one, and this grieving seems to be getting very long term, where they're starting to feel lonely and depressed, not completely like some clinical depression, but some sort of depression like this, that they keep remembering the memories they had with that person when the person was alive. And so what I want to say is this is like a vicious circle, Gregory. People seem to get into this circle where they can't let go of these memories, they can't let go of this sadness, and even if somebody comes, a friend, to give them a few words of comfort, they don't seem to...
Hello?
Yes, I can...
Yeah, he's lost
It's
again.
broken off again.
You can't hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Mena,
Hello?
Mena, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Mena?
No,
Yes,
you
I
got
can hear you,
broken.
but
Yours got broken off. I
Okay.
don't hear you.
All right.
breaking.
Okay, I don't know what's happening there, because I'm definitely talking without a break. So let me make it brief then. I'll make it brief. So, Gregory, when somebody's suffering this long-term grieving, and it's like a vicious circle, they can't get out of it because they're just lost in that way. Is there a way? What's the way out for them? Can somebody help them, or they have to help themselves?
Very simply, they have to help themselves. Now look at a different scenario in which you have a child who now has to grow up, mature, and needs to go to a different country for his or her education. Do you grieve forever that, or do you wish that child doesn't move out at all? When the child is matured enough, or when the child who has also spun his own trade, when the time comes, will that child not go its way? Would you say the child should remain in the house of the parents and not get married because you so love the child? Like you use the word loved ones. What sort of love would that be that will not permit an independent human soul to sally forth in order to experience? Such love, if at all one may call love, It's a binding which does not allow that personality to move for further experiences, albeit in a temporary way. For before too long, no one should or is going to remain here on earth for that long time. When the time comes, due to the threads it has spun and the possibility that creation gives, he or she has to pass on. So when one tries to hold on to the departing one and gets depressed, it is self-humiliation and, perpetrating self-injury. For the person so loved has his or her own task to accomplish, just as you yourself, who is grieving, have your own path to follow. The possibility only came due to the meeting of paths, which paths may persist for some time, not permanently. And thereafter, having experience of each other, move forward for further experiencing. Or have you heard of the scenario where a mother and a father, they love their child so much that that child should not grow up and should not even go to school but remain at home, should not have his own life but remain at home because of love? Such one would not call love. So, true, there has been an occurrence in which a personality had to depart in accordance with the laws of creation. And now this personality has dropped its physical body. The best one can do is to wish the departing one well and wish that rich experiences may come its way. These experiences may be joyful, the experiences may be filled with grief, depending on how he or she prepares itself. For in these preparations, joy or sorrow may turn to joy. And in the lack of preparation and recognition, joy may turn out to be grief or sorrow.
Thank you for that, Gregory. And now, people commemorate the people who have passed on. For example, it might be a religious thing where, let's say, they get together after 40 days of after the passing of the loved one, let's say, and they come together for prayer and so on. Is there any real significance in these 40 days, or coming together to, you could say, to commemorate or to pray for the
Grief,
departed one?
Ascension.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you might say commemorate. The same memories would be flashback on the departed.
Okay,
How
I
should
think
such commemorations be observed?
Yeah, let me make this.
There are many cultures that have recognized to some extent the stages in the withdrawal of the human soul away from the community in its path once it has dropped the physical body. Depending on the inner maturity of the human soul, its movement towards the lighter and higher realms is much quicker, very rapid. But for many, the rapidity is not that much. It stays for the different bodies that have been spun to dissolve. And for some, it may take around 48 days for the different body, the ethereal bodies, the astral body to dissolve as the human spirit is moving on. Much of this again can be found in the work In the Light of Truth. But many cultures, refined over time, have come to recognize this and felt the need for one more time to have memories of the departing one. If such cultures, people in such cultures gather together and send good thoughts, wishing the departed one well, then it is of benefit. For what is of benefit to the human spirit is what it needs to journey further. If, however, in these cultures, many still gather together to have memories of him and wish to bring him back, then such is not of benefit to the human spirit, because the physical body has returned to dust. Neither is he going to make use of the body, which is now prostrate. Before too long, it will disintegrate, for it is temporal. So, depending on what has been put in place, those celebrating in quotes, and the person who is departing in quotes, depending on how they view things and what they have put in place, depending on their maturity and their understanding to some extent, the laws through which they themselves came into existence. Depending on their understanding, much of the activities could bring grief or joy to the departing one.
Thanks for that again, Gregory.
Yeah, can I quickly ask, then
Yeah.
how do you show empathy to someone who was lost, the departed one? Or is there no
How
way?
can one show empathy to one who has lost
Yeah,
a departed one?
yeah,
In quotes, you cannot say you have lost a departed one. You didn't lose that person, because that person was never bounded to you or bonded to you.
okay,
You only had an opportunity to have interacted.
yeah,
That person has come, and due to the paths woven out or that he himself has not departed. So just like you yourself have come here, and after some time interacting with other people, because you're not an island, you also had to go. So when the question arises, how can one, what should one do or show empathy, one can only say or wish good thoughts, pure thoughts, for it is these pure thoughts that rise higher and higher. And because these thoughts are pure and directed to a particular person, if that person is open to these pure thoughts, those pure thoughts will be attached, or that person will harmonize or will resonate with such beautiful thoughts. It is these thoughts, or pure thoughts, that will help in elevating or in clarifying the environment that that departed one now is, such that it's able to come to better clarity, and such clarity will bring him or her joy. And such joys are what many need when they depart from the gloomy environment that surrounds the earth nowadays.
Okay. Sad, is there any announcement here?
Yes, I've got going on a slightly different angle now. You see documentaries for nature a lot, and you see animals hunting animals, and they, obviously, let's say, different animals chasing other animals, and then the let's say it's a tiger chasing a deer or something like that, and normally they catch the weak one, and eat that weak one, and the parents of the deer are trying to protect the little baby child or the young deer, and so when they lose this young deer, you don't see them. Well, obviously you don't really see them crying, but they don't seem to be so, let's say, grieving in when this happens, and they just sort of move on, and this happened, and they did their best, and they couldn't save their child, and they move on and continue. Do you think the human beings can act in a similar way, or are they just so different that they need to have some sort of period of mourning? Because, as I said, animals don't seem to be grieving when they lose their their young ones through an attack, or say.
Well, in the first instance, it's a bit surprising that one may take cues from the animals, which animals we find ourselves to be better than, or we are human beings. The only advice one may give on this sort of scenario is to first understand the purpose of life here on earth. And any person you yourself is opportune to come across, you should do the best you can to make such coming together pleasant or helpful, such that whatever benefit can accrue from it is shared by all, such that there will be no regrets. Then, what then happens becomes very natural. For many, a returns, a dark thread would have been severed, and one has cause to be grateful. One should act in such a way to be like the case of the firefighters, one for all and all for one. Only in such a scenario do we have harmony. For harmony does not arise only in one person. There must be others who, like you, have come here to experience. And therefore, being very far away from home, which is paradise, the need arises for cooperation in building up, in supporting one another in order to experience and therefore to grow. That is what one is referring to, one for all and all for one. And also understanding that life on earth is only a temporal. It doesn't mean that that is the end. For when man becomes convinced of the continuity of activities of the human soul or of the human spirit, then many of the griefs and the sorrows will vanish. Then it will show much more understanding for the opportunities that life has offered. Then it may say, it is free at last. It is free at last. For freedom only occurs when the human spirit understands its responsibilities, when it understands what the free will means. Then the human spirit can thank the power, the wisdom that had made it possible for it, the human spirit, to be free.
Thank you for that, Gregory. I just want to share a story I heard on the radio earlier today. It is about grief, but it's a little bit unusual case, actually. Basically, there are two sisters, young sisters. One sister is more sporty and she wanted to go for a jog, and the younger sister didn't want to go, was not so keen, but anyway she persuaded her, and then they went out together jogging. Because they said they will only go for 20 minutes, they decided not to take their mobile phones with them. And then as they started jogging along, at one point, unfortunately, the younger sister, who wasn't so keen to do the running, tripped over her leg and twisted her leg, or broke even her leg actually. And suddenly, it was excruciating pain for this younger sister. And the older sister didn't want to run to look for help or call the 999, and so they waited for somebody to pass, and then somebody did pass and they called the ambulance. Anyway, I know it sounds a long story, but basically they were taken to the hospital, and they did some treatment for them, but unfortunately, it's a bit of a long story, but unfortunately it was decided that this younger sister's leg had to be amputated. And suddenly the younger sister was, of course, in a bit of horror to realize that this is the only, because of I don't want to go into too much in detail of it, but this was a very unfortunate thing. Normally you can recover your leg, but somehow the oxygen had been cut off, and it was just too late to do anything. This is not, as I said, they tried a few things, but it wasn't working. So it looked the only, and it wasn't immediate, but in the end they had to say that we need to amputate your leg. And suddenly the young sister had to think, oh, my future as just 25-year-old girl is really seriously going to be different now. And also the older sister felt some guilt that, oh, I've pushed my sister to come with me. If I didn't push her, she would not have had this accident in the first place. So this is like any case. So this was like a grief over a loss of a leg, which is, it's like your future has been affected, or what you could do in your life. Any case, this young lady has, let's say, managed to get through her life, and she wrote a book about it, on the story of this experience. And she was quite a matter of fact in all, how these things happened to her. She didn't use the word philosophical, but somehow she wasn't grieving as I know it's not the same as losing a loved one, but losing a limb here, the impact of that, which quite seriously affect her for the future. But yet somehow she took it. She just worked through everything, and made her life work. Going to work, going to, making a home, and all these things that she was able to do. So I think, Gregory, if you can just share a little bit of, let's say, I don't know, maybe wisdom about this type of story, but when these things happen to people, what sort of attitude we need to have to, that we can not grieve about these things, but actually find a way that leads you upwards, let's say, or uplifts you. And so how can we have such an attitude where, when, let's say, so-called bad things happen, that we actually work through them in a positive way, let me say that way.
One may only say what Paul at that time mentioned when he was preaching. At the end of many of these teachings, or when he was writing letters, he ended up, be of good cheer. And on some occasions, he also mentioned, all things, be they so sorrowful or evil, are for the good of those who have trust in the Lord. One may reinterpret it by saying, keep the hearts of your thoughts pure, and by so doing, you will bring peace and happiness to you and those around you.
Thank you so much for that sort of advice, which right at there, just really brings focus to what this topic should be, how we should deal with this topic of grief. So thank you so much for that. Menad, is there anything you'd like to say to the listeners to say goodbye?
Oh yes, thanks for listening, but the honors lies in you to examine the work. All we have explained, or what is just out of our own little understanding, what you can take out of it is from what you yourself would have to do in reading the work itself and examining.
Thank you for that. Gregory, anything you like to say to the listeners to say goodbye?
Only to say, be of good cheer in all activities that you participate in.
Thank you for that. And dear listeners, from me, Saad, here in the studio, yes, I wish you a great week. God bless. And we'll be back next week with a new topic, of course. And yes, as we all, three of us, urge you to please do pick up the Grail message in the Light of Truth by Abrushin and examine it for yourself and see the wonder and the beauty it brings, and the peace it brings to all of us once we realize what knowledge it contains and understand what it brings. All the best, everybody. Take care. Hold on, everybody. Brother Sion will be next. Stay on to tune in to him. So while we wait, we'll just play some ads. All the best, everybody. Take care.